Welcome back. This is part 2 of Chapter 7. In the previous video lecture, we looked at the variety of different types of products and how to market services and how services differ from consumer and industrial goods. In this video lecture, we're going to look at the third part of this unit, which is brands. And brands are things that are marketed, even though, once again, they're not necessarily tangible, but they're not quite services, and they're certainly not material goods. So we're going to go into several things here, and let's look at our roadmap. We're going to look into how labeling and packaging contribute to the brand and brand equity. The second thing we're going to look at is this concept of brand equity, that there is value in a brand. And you see this very often when people protect copyrights, where people protect logos, slogans, or things that are identifiable to a particular product or a particular business or firm. And so we'll kind of flesh out that concept a little bit. Then we're going to look at what attributes, what makes a good brand, and particularly, just any brand is not necessarily something that it's not that every brand is as good as another, but we're going to look at what types of things tend to make a better brand. So things that are easy to pronounce, things that are easy to remember, and just kind of go through a checklist of what attributes contribute to making a good brand. And then we're going to talk about brand marketing strategies and how they differ, and how you can expand, let's say, the equity in the brand through marketing. With that said, let's begin. So what is a brand? And this is pretty much a straightforward definition. A brand is a name, term, sign, symbol, design, or a combination of these that identifies a product or services of one seller or group of sellers and differentiates them from those of their competitors. So this can be something as simple as like a color. So for Pepsi and Coca-Cola, blue and red for Pepsi and Coca-Cola respectively can be, you could say, are part of their brand. Another part of the brand could be a particular type of lettering, a sign. If you think of just in terms of logos, if you think of sneakers, Nike, Adidas, they all have identifiable, let's say, logos that allow you to identify their brand. Sometimes brand can be just a simple type aspect of the design. I've talked before about Apple products, with the rectangle and the rounded corners and the one-touch button as being part of like Apple's design, so that if you drew a rounded corner rectangle with a circle at the bottom, people would immediately identify that as an Apple product. Certainly the apple with the bite out of it is also an identifiable logo for Apple. And I would say even just certain of the colors, the limited color palette that Apple products tend to have also kind of contribute to their brand. Brand could be something like just a kind of service that's usually associated with this. So if you're McDonald's, it might be, let's say, the quality of the French fries, and also, let's say, and historically, although maybe not so much recently, not that there is the clean bathrooms. And that was one thing that was emphasized early on, because being a franchise, people didn't know McDonald's, and so the idea that you knew the bathrooms were in good condition when you were traveling across the country was part of how McDonald's kind of emphasized a sanitary, clean, like upscale environment for their customers. So any of these things can, let's say, contribute to the brand. And when you brand, you might have more than one brand in a particular company. So you might have a company-wide brand, but you might have brand for individual products. So for example, Pepsi has many different brands, and GM has many different brands. And we talked about this before when we talked about monopolistic competition, and how they differentiate themselves and how they try to appeal to different types of customers and market segments. So why do we have branding? Well, it has advantages to both the buyers and to the sellers. For the buyers, a brand helps identify the product. So there are a lot of things about any given product that are hard to evaluate on site alone. And so a brand says, okay, it's this type of product, and then that's kind of a shorthand for explaining, like, things like quality, consistency, how well made something is, the details of maybe a contract or a service. Because they have a reputation, and that reputation is connected to their brand. If you see the brand, then you can, let's say, assume that a quality or consistency or certain services or features that are included would be in that. So one example of this is that Subaru, all their vehicles are four-wheel drive, and if particularly for people who have to drive over rough conditions, you don't really need to check whether a particular Subaru car has four-wheel drive, because part of their brand is that all their cars have four-wheel drive, and that kind of sets them apart from, let's say, other automobile brands. It has advantages as a seller because the brand kind of tells the product's story. Why do we take, let's say, service seriously? Why do we insist on a certain level of quality? It can be something like a small history about the founder of a particular firm or business. It can provide legal protection, so it can provide you protection against people who are trying to imitate your product or try to selling their products as your product that can either damage your reputation or, in a sense, hurt your sales. And lastly, it lets you segment markets because your brands have a certain identity and different market segments have certain identities. So if you're aiming at an older, younger, racially diverse market, or male or female, or whatever other ways you're segmenting the market, the brand can kind of, in a sense, connect, that this product is for a particular type of person. So I mentioned before when we were talking about GM about Pontiac, which is a line they no longer have, which was basically a line of sports cars, and they were kind of targeted at middle-aged men. And the basic design of a Pontiac vehicle was a small car and an oversized engine. And so you could think of it as like a midlife crisis on wheels, and that was kind of, let's say, that reputation helped to connect it with a particular type of buyer. At the same time, you can see other products that are identified by their brand with a particular market segment. So probably the packaging is very important for conveying the brand. One, because the packaging usually has the logo on it, a certain coloring, a certain type of typeface, etc. So, for example, one thing about Red Bull is that it's not the standard shape of a soda can. It's taller and thinner, even though it's, I believe, well, it's a typical can is about 12 ounces. This is about 8 fluid ounces. But the point is that it's thinner. You have the identifiable Red Bull logo. I think they like red because it is something like it's agitating, it's exciting, and Red Bull is supposed to be kind of like a pick-me-up, a stimulant, and so that is part of that. There's what other? I mean, the other thing with Red Bull gives you wings. It was kind of an early advertising campaign that Red Bull had. So when you design and produce the container, a lot of money goes into simple choices like typeface, like having motion. So you see that there's a diagonal line that Red Bull, on the left-hand side, you see it's diagonal to incorporate the typeface. On the right-hand side, you see how there's a diagonal dividing up the space. It's not just simply 4 quadrants. That kind of conveys, anyone who's familiar with design and art, that conveys movement. And that creates some type of more energy, less staid, kind of a little bit of more edgy than a similar product. And often when I've done, like, let's say, brands and logo, cahoots, almost all the students are able to identify most brands within milliseconds, if not no more than 2 seconds. They're able to identify a brand, even when I take off the name of the brand, because they're so recognizable. And we'll talk about what that is. But a lot of that is packaging. And so, packaging is important not just in terms of, let's say, the design of the container, but it's important in terms of quality. Like, you don't want to have a dented package. It can be in displays that are in stores. So very often, food products that have a lot of brand identity, they don't do the arrangement of their products on the shelf. The store doesn't do the arrangement of the products on the shelves. They'll have a sales rep come in and stack the soda cans or the soda bricks and things of that sort, because they want a certain image and they want to convey that, and they want to be able to control that. You can see this in terms of design of end caps for certain products. All these things are kind of important, and I think even one of them is just something as simple as color. And let me just give an example about power tools, which is not necessarily one of things that are going to get dirty. They're not things that are going to be nice and clean if you use them in a certain way. But you can identify colors with different types of power tools. So Ryobi has kind of a light green shade. Makita has a teal color. Milwaukee's Best is red. Rigid is orange. And this kind of is a way of clearly signaling the different levels of power tools, from ones that are for more do-it-yourselfers, homeowners, to those that are by professional handymen. So on top of that is packaging, is that they should help market the brand. So the point about this is that Fuse is something that's using like fruit flavors, and so you often see the pictures of the different fruits that are incorporated into it on it. You kind of see kind of a flow of like water, so you kind of have the way that it streaks is to create movement, and so there's kind of a two-tone and multicolor, like say, design on it, so that it is kind of a wave effect. Um, so the first thing is that the package should market the brand. It also needs to protect the product, and so the point is that you want a packaging that is going to protect the content. So a good example of this is just that Amazon packages have done a lot of things about how to create packages that are easy to open but protect the contents very well. And if you've ever got an Amazon box, and I'm sure many people are getting a lot of them right now, there's kind of an ingenious aspect to how many things are packaged in Amazon boxes to protect. And Amazon is just the retailer, but one other thing just about the packaging, it's not just simply that the package protects what's inside it. Everyone can identify the Amazon smile or smile arrow as being part of Amazon. Another thing, it should be ease of use, which means easy to open. As I was saying, Amazon has spent a lot of time thinking about how to make boxes that are very easy to open, but also rugged for shipping purposes. If you have a container, you want it to be something that you can pick up, which means that it fits into your hand. And a lot of studies in ergonomics go into something that's easy to open, easy to hold, easy to you see this even on detergent, spill-proof like openings, so that when you pour the detergent, it doesn't go all over the place. If you're in certain areas and certain types of products, you want product and user child safety, so like child-proof caps, things of that sort. The size of different objects, so very often with children's toys, they have to be a certain size so that they can't be something that can be put into the mouth and ingested. And what's becoming more and more important are environmental concerns, so recyclable packaging. And you see this now with the replacement of plastic straws with paper straws. And I'm old enough to remember styrofoam containers for fast food, and now you see, paper containers for the most part for fast food. So labeling refers to what's printed on the package. And so usually this is just the product name, but it's not just simply functional. It doesn't just say the name of the product. It usually, and as someone who does calligraphy, they're very attentive to different font styles and different typefaces. The other thing about it is that there's a lot of labeling is now regulated by the government, particularly the Food and Drug Administration. So it used to be that you had to label anything that was contained inside food products was important. Also labeling the active ingredient within various different drugs and pharmaceuticals. They might have some information about the product. A lot of food products will have like recipes on the side. And now what you see is more health labeling, which is, it used to be just the number of calories in a serving of the food product, but now you'll see how many grams of fiber, how many grams of carbohydrates, the recommended daily allowance of various vitamins and minerals that are in various food products. If you are buying something, usually they'll have, you're buying like something with multiple parts, they'll have like an inventory of all the different parts that are included in the package. Usually they'll have instructions that will give you easy to start or install. And I know that many people who buy things online, one of the most frustrating things is the instructions are sometimes not really that great. And even though the product is cheap and even though the product is functional, some people like detailed instructions. Other people will just say, look, I see all the pieces here, I can figure it out on my own. But labeling is important for that too. And since there is finite space on the outside of the box or the product, there is a whole science about where to put labels so that they're easily seen and where to put information. One of the great books that I would recommend to anyone to read, especially if you're going into marketing, is called The Design of Everyday Things. And it goes into a variety of different things, just like how you design a coffee cup. The idea of having like the one handle on the side and the size of the coffee cup is not something that was just randomly chosen, that there was actually a lot of thought going into that. And if you go back in time, you can see a lot more variability in the shapes and the labeling and the instructions. So the point is that I think that if you're going into marketing, there's a lot to be done with product design. I'll just give you one other example. Fisher Price Toys has a job for a resident poet, and the resident poet at Fisher Price writes all the jingles that you see on the side of Fisher Price toy boxes. So imagine if like your job is just to write kind of like the ad and copy on the boxes of toys, and that this is an adult job that pays very, very well. And the point about that is they find that something important enough because a simple, easy to read jingle is something that a child can remember, but also kind of in a sense identifies certain of famous toys. So let's look at one well-known label. I'm sure all of you recognize this. This is Tabasco sauce. How well does it fulfill the functions of identifying the brand? First of all, I think I didn't even have to say what this is. You knew exactly what this is, Tabasco sauce. And I think what about this is the actual label of what it is, original Tabasco pepper sauce, Tabasco.com, is actually relatively small. You don't see Tabasco in big, bold letters. But what I think makes this identifiable is the circle inside diamond shape, the red background, the green lettering. And also, I think you might say the attitude of this, it's 130 years old and still able to whoop your butt. I mean, and that totally is more identifiable than actually Tabasco. And so the point is that it does a pretty good job, that you know what this is, even if I took the identifying labels off, like if I took Tabasco off it. I'm sure that 99 out of 100 students will be able to identify what the product is. And I think, red, white, and green is one of the classical color combinations. Obviously, it's, Christmassy colors, but also it's a very good contrast. So logos, we've talked about this before, are easily recognizable symbols. Signs are stylized written portrayals of the business brand name. So for example, we all know the Apple logo with the apple used to be actually multicolored, but the apple was a little bite out of it, and the one leaf is an effective use of a logo. Kind of Pizza Hut, the kind of like the red roof, and then kind of like the brushstroke Pizza Hut typeface underneath it. McDonald's, the golden arches would be a good example of another logo. And it's just kind of people see images before they actually read text. And so the more that your logo is a recognizable image or a recognizable design, it's kind of a shortcut to identify your product. They can see it. So for example, as I said, sometimes the logo, most important thing is just the color. And I talked about the different colors of power tools, but even things like laundry detergent. Tide being a bright orange color is part of, let's say, its logo or its brand. And helps you identify that from when you're walking down, let's say, a grocery aisle, and you can see it from, let's say, all the way down from the other side, the long side of the aisle. So one more example of a logo in action. This is the Pepsi logo. This is not the classic Pepsi logo. It's a little bit more of a modernized and you could say stylized design. And they're using it and want to kind of, use it in place of O's in an advertisement. But I think the thing about this is that even though it's not exactly the Pepsi logo, the traditional one with the kind of balanced wave, you can still identify that because of the color, the overall orientation of the three different parts, the red, white, and blue in the circle, and therefore you see it. You can identify it with the brand and identify it with the product. The logo is, kind of, as I said, Pepsi has always emphasized kind of the new generation, avant-garde. And this redesign of the logo still keeps the identification there, but a more adventurous and you could say more of a youthful kind of a more modern way than their traditional 1960s logo, which I would say is like a red circle with a red wave ripple and a blue wave ripple. So brand equity is kind of ownership, and brand equity is kind of the differential effect that having a particular brand has on how customers respond to your product. So it can be like some people like brand name products because it indicates quality, or it might signal that something is expensive and they're trying to signal to other people that they've bought an expensive product. The point is that brands have differential effects, which means that if you prefer to have something with one brand over another, so there are people who only drink Coca-Cola and other people who only drink Pepsi, and that is a differential effect of the brand. It doesn't mean that it has the same differential effect on all customers, But the point is that in the aggregate, that people identify with your brand and people have a good association with your brand is your brand equity. And so one great example of this is airlines. And so there used to be two airlines, United and American Airlines. United, I believe, bought out American Airlines, but instead of, let's say, rebranding the American Airlines as United, they had done research and so found that people had a better association with American Airlines, and so the name you see on the company and the name you see on the planes is American Airlines, even though it was United that bought out American and not vice versa. So when you build strong brands, you first are looking. What the kind of shortcut here is that a strong brand is one that has a great brand equity, which means the value of the brand, the idea that you can just put the name onto the brand, and able to capture like consumers' preferences and their loyalty. So one other good example of this is RCA. RCA stands for Radio Corporation of America. It's one of the oldest electronics firms. It goes back to the I believe 1920s. And you have the little like record player with the little dog looking at it. RCA doesn't really, I don't believe that there's actually an RCA corporation anymore. RCA is a brand or a logo that was been purchased by a Chinese firm that makes flat screen TVs. But the point about it is they wanted the brand because the brand allowed them to portray themselves as being the brand loyalty that RCA had over time, even though they're not, let's say it's not the same company. And so you can treat it as an asset. And so if you're doing the accounting on this, you can count the ownership of a brand, the legal ownership of the trademark, as a competitive advantage because only you are able to use it. And you're able to take legal action against people that are infringing upon your brand or using parts of it or creating confusion between your brand. Probably the most famous example is that Coca-Cola, when they came out with a new product line, I think Coke Zero, they talked about taste infringement, that the taste was so close to the real thing that it was sort of like impeding upon their brand equity of the original Coca-Cola product. And really what a brand kind of signals is the loyalty that people will continue to buy your product over a long period of time because they associate a high quality, high value with experience or experience through others of your products. And so this is what is customer equity. And we talked more about customer equity is owning customers over a longer period of time. So we're going to talk about various different ways that you can approach brand, expand, develop your brand, build it out, and different types of general approaches to marketing your brand. So you see it here. So we're going to talk about 4 general areas. The first one is brand positioning, which means just in the sense of like we talked about positioning in the previous unit. Secondly is selecting the name of the brand. We talked about some examples like American Airlines versus United, and doing things where your brand is not going to be become watered down or diluted. In previous video lectures, I talked about the problem of like Xerox and Band-Aid, that Xerox and Band-Aid are particular brand names. However, they become so, they proliferated to the point that they become so common that people use the term Band-Aid even when it's not a Johnson & Johnson product, and people use Xerox even when it's not a Xerox product copier. Brand sponsorships, which means different sharing the brand with different groups. So you can have a manufacturer's brand, a private brand like a store brand. You can do cross branding of like you see, for example, the brand of particularly sports leagues where they have an official product of the NFL or Major League Baseball or things of that sort. And then there's just in a sense of developing the brand by developing new lines, new product lines under the same brand, or creating multiple brands in the same company, or if you're seeing a brand losing its holding power, creating a new brand. So brand positioning is that positioning, as we said, is what position, perception. How do consumers and customers see your product and you see your brand in relation to its competitors? So it can be things like what types of characteristics your product has, what benefits that your product often conveys, and then sometimes beliefs and values, which means it might be a commitment to environmental protection, it might be a commitment to high quality, it might be a commitment to workers' rights, or organic purity of the inputs into the products. It could be things like low prices or customer service, and that you want a brand to convey that to you. So, for example, here we see an image of Godiva chocolate, and I think the idea of Godiva chocolate is obviously with the story of Lady Godiva, that it's somewhat decadent. It's almost it has a European resonance with it. Godiva boxes tend to be gold or gold colors. All those things kind of signify a higher quality, that this is different than Nestle's or Hershey's chocolate, which is more of, let's say, a middle class or middle ground type of chocolate product. Godiva is more expensive. And you can see this also with Perugino, where, Italian chocolates, a little bit, foreign, exotic, higher quality, but, Perugino, like Bacci, tend to have silver packaging, and Godiva has gold packaging, and it just indicates a higher quality, or let's say more, it's not just a chocolate, it's a Godiva chocolate. And I remember, usually you would not give a Hershey's bar or a Nestle's bar as a Christmas present, but I see a lot of people give, Godiva chocolates as a Christmas present, because they're not just in the sense a bar of chocolate, each one is designed, it has like a little shape around it. It has different combinations of nuts and caramels and things of that sort. And so Godiva has kind of positioned itself at the high end, high quality, the market. And I would say that even though it's higher priced than regular chocolate, it's not priced in such a way that it's not available to the mainstream of most American consumers. Most people can afford Godiva, but it's something that you buy as a special purchase, not as something you have on an everyday basis. So second thing is, selection of the name. And so you want certain desirable qualities to go with your brand name. It should suggest the positive things that you want to associate with your product. So it can be, so for example, for the logo for Nike, the swoosh, Nike swoosh, is indicating kind of motion or movement, and that's kind of what you would want in a sneaker product. Tommy Hilfiger tends to be very nostalgic American, and hence the color palette of red, white, and blue, plus a neutral color, tends to be the Tommy Hilfiger, Ralph Lauren type of logo. If you want something that's more exotic or something that looks foreign, you might look for a name that kind of suggests kind of an exotic or foreign aspect to it. If you want to, in America, we tend to see English names and English spellings as being somewhat more refined or upper class. And so you very often, I see this in terms of soap, like something like Barberry soap. It sounds English, and therefore it sounds a little bit old school and kind of refined. So you want it to be kind of hint at the product's benefits and qualities that you want to associate with it. It needs to be easy to pronounce, recognize, and remember. And I think probably the most recent obvious example of this is in the names of political candidates in the Democratic primary. We had one candidate who was a mayor of South Bend, Indiana, and he had probably a hard to pronounce last name, Buttigieg. Even I have trouble pronouncing it, and I've said it multiple times. And so what did he do? He didn't go by his last name like most candidates do. He went by, his first name, Mayor Pete. Same thing with Joe Biden, that Biden was downplayed, but Joe was upplayed, because it's kind of like the average Joe, indicating kind of the association with ordinary people. And so something that's easy to pronounce, recognize, and remember is usually better, unless it's so hard to remember. It's so hard to say or remember that people just know it because of its difficulty. And so there is sometimes where you can pick a really hard to pronounce thing, and people have fun mispronouncing it, but they know it because it has maybe a distinctive spelling. It should stand out. Joe, it doesn't stand out. It's kind of like an ordinary name, and I'm not meaning to disparage anyone named Joe. But the point is that it doesn't let, John Doe, Jane Doe are not going to stand out. You want something that is going to be memorable, and something that's going to be not sound like everything else. So when we talked about, let's say, water products, So many of the water products have some combination of Arctic glacier springs, and you know, kind of playing a word salad with those types of words, but that doesn't make it stand out from, let's say, other types of products if you're just playing around with those words. If you have a word that is, let's say, unusual or something that is not often used in this context, it's going to be more distinctive. You want something that's extendable, which means it can be applied to other products within your different product lines in your product mix. It should translate easily into foreign languages, and probably the best example of this is the Chevrolet Nova, which is a very common vehicle in the United States. However, it had trouble for sales in Latin American markets because Nova can mean something, but it also means it doesn't go. And for an automobile, you don't want to have something translate into it doesn't go. It doesn't make sense. I could give some more examples, but you probably are not as familiar with the Japanese market of like foreign products just not being able to translate into the market. So certain things that are American products you see all the time in Japan. Ritz crackers, actually very common. Coca-Cola, Pepsi, very common in Japan. But also convenience stores. So 7-Eleven you see probably more commonly in Japan than you see in the United States. It's one of the most common convenience stores. And AM/PM, which is not really well known on the East Coast, but it is a major convenience store on the West Coast. And you see these all over Japan. And one of the more common convenience stores is called Lawson's, written out in English Roman letters. And it's probably one of the most common Japanese convenience stores you can find all throughout Tokyo. And you have to wonder, why are all the convenience stores in Japan named after, kind of the foreign product? It's because they associate a convenience store with kind of American life and American culture. And lastly, it has to be distinctive enough that you can register it, which means it has to have some tangibility to it that certain things you can't copyright because they're general use words. So you can't copyright coffee or tea or car because those are general use words, and you can't in a sense bar your competitors from using them. So what you often see is, to make it more copyrightable, is you see creative misspellings of names. So for example, lift is not spelled L-I-F-T. You spell it L-Y-F-T because that is a copyrightable version, while the common word lift, L-I-F-T, is not. So brand sponsorship is different types of brands. You can have a national brand or a manufacturer's brand. So you see this in terms of like Heinz ketchup, which you can find in a lot of different places, Ritz crackers, Nabisco, Oreos, things of that sort. Usually because this is a brand that's associated with the production of the particular item, and therefore it carries with it no matter where it's being sold. What you can see very often are store brands. So in Walmart, you have a private label, Great Value. You see is for their generic products. And it kind of reinforces a key thing about Walmart's identity, which is that Walmart products are cost competitive. Therefore, they're emphasizing the great value, that it's the same thing as you would buy if you had the name brand, but it's cost competitive. CVS used to have what was called CVS Gold Label, which meant CVS had a variety of generic products that they sold right alongside the manufacturer national brands. You can have licensed brands, which means one company controls or owns the brand, but they use it or lease it to other companies so that they can make products under the brand that's more recognizable. The best example of this is the one I mentioned before about RCA, Radio Corporation of America, licensing its brand to various different Chinese electronics companies to sell their products under their name, let's say the RCA name. And then there's co-branding, which means that things that extending a brand from one product to another product. So something that has a lot of brand equity. Apple would be a good example of this, is that Apple makes a series of products, and they, no matter what the item is, they do something, iPhone, iPad, iPod, but also they kind of keep the same general look of an Apple product no matter what type of product it is. So it either has kind of that white plastic look or kind of a silver chrome look. And that they try to, in a sense, co-brand by kind of extending their brand to a variety of different products. So one example of branding is like Nickelodeon. Um, but I think that the thing about Nickelodeon is that Nickelodeon is a brand in itself as a channel, and all of us can know like the slime. I mean, it was green slime when I was younger, but kind of the big orange kind of paint splatter that Nickelodeon is written on. It's done in kind of in a brushstroke font. Once again, kind of referring kind of more of a kid fun font. But there are also all the characters that appeared on Nickelodeon, and probably one of the more famous ones is SpongeBob SquarePants. And that, instead of like Nickelodeon promoting SpongeBob, you really see SpongeBob promoting Nickelodeon. Fox has its own brand identity, but The Simpsons are a Fox brand, and you can see The Simpsons sometimes promoting Fox, sometimes by criticizing Fox, kind of in a sense, a way that we're kind of rebelling against the corporate suits that run our company and own our brand. So I mean, probably the other one that's most famous in this is Disney. Things are famous because they're part of the Disney universe, but things that are also in the Disney universe make Disney famous. So from the traditional like mainstays like Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, Goofy, Minnie Mouse, etc., to more modern ones like Mulan, Little Mermaid, and probably not even keeping up with the most recent Disney movies. So this is kind of like, say, where you have a stable of characters. We see this in the Marvel comic universe, DC Comics, where there's a lot of promotion of not just the Marvel comic universe live action movies, but also animated movies, and then also merchandising all around this. And what you might say about co-branding or cross-branding is that they're not treating, what used to be is that they treated each superhero with its own kind of independent storyline that didn't really involve the other superheroes. So like if you had a Superman movie, it just had Superman in it. If you have a Batman movie, it just had Batman in it. And what you're seeing with the Marvel comic universe is that the interaction of all the different movies building toward one storyline where they all kind of share. And I think that's kind of marketing genius, even though I'm not a particular fan of the movies themselves. So we're going to talk about brand development strategies, and there's basically 4 different brand development strategies: line extension, brand extension, multi-brands, and new brands. And you can think of this in terms of a 2x2 table. So the product category, that is it a new product or an old product, so existing versus a new product, and then the brand name being existing and new. So using an existing product with an existing brand, this is just extending your line, the brand. So this is like more products within the same product line. So for Apple Macs, there's a variety of different, let's say, generation of Mac computers, but they're all basically laptop computers. But you can take an existing product and create a new brand on it. So you might have more than one brand. This might be something like GM extending toward many different brands under the GM name. So GM versus GMC or Chevrolet. You can take an existing brand name and apply it to a new product. So once again, you saw this with Apple. Start off with iPod, iPad, iPhone, etc. And there's that I something is become part of the Apple brand. And obviously, new products, new brands are just new novel creations that don't exist before. So let's talk about each of these in more detail. So line extension is taking an existing brand name and new forms, colors, sizes, ingredients, flavors, etc. So this could be something like Progresso soup, and you could have different types of soups under the Progresso name. Progresso soups are known as being kind of hearty soups, bean soups, bean and pasta soups, as opposed to things like chicken, more broth soups like chicken noodle. But the point is they can come out with different flavors of soup, but all still have the Progresso label on it, which is the brand that kind of unites them. The Progresso soup can is all kind of the same color, blue, etc. So as opposed to a brand extension, instead of extending a brand name to new product categories, and I think still the best example is the one I mentioned in the previous slide, which is that taking the Apple brand and start off as an iPod, just a digital music player, to an iPhone, obviously a smartphone device, to an iPad, a type of mini computer, tablet, etc. And I think it might have reached a point where this has become too widespread, and as a result, they're trying to move off the I whatever of naming their products. But I think the point is that it's been very effective, because if you like one of the products, you probably like the other types of products, and you like the fact that they were compatible with each other. Multi-branding, different features and appeal to different customer segments. So what you're basically doing with this is that you are branding a variety of different products all with the same brand. So this might be a good example of like Walmart's Great Value brand, is that you're locking up shelf space and preventing it from your competitors. And you're taking the one brand that has identifiable, whether it's spaghetti or whether it's garbage bags, but you're basically using the association with Walmart, the association of the store brand, and that you have, like, if you like one of the products, you probably are going to say, well, even though it's a generic brand, it's good enough, and you might, even without trying it, try another Great Value brand. And lastly, developing new brands is in the belief that, sometimes brands are seen as being older, nostalgic, the previous generations don't have the same purchase that they have before. And so what you might do is you might get rid of the old brand and just find a new brand. So I'm trying to think of the good example of this where someone just completely changed their brand name. I believe Spectrum used to be Comcast, and I think Comcast was not as catchy, and so Spectrum is kind of the same company. And I think Cablevision as well has sort of renamed itself. It doesn't go by Cablevision. I think it's called LTL. One last example. So R.J. Reynolds, make the large R.J. Reynolds, the large cigarette manufacturer. They've rebranded themselves as Altria, which doesn't have the same associations as like the previous cigarette company. So once brands are, sometimes brands are just catching lightning in a bottle, but usually there's some more strategy managing the brand that you need to. You can't just say like, okay, we have this association, it'll run on its own. You have to continuously reinforce and communicate the brand positioning so that it holds that position inside the consumer's mind. So even things that are well known like McDonald's, Walmart, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, spend a lot of money on advertising to, in a sense, maintain its brand integrity and retain the associations in the consumer's mind. So even though they're updating, let's say their advertising, they're updating their marketing, they're still kind of emphasizing the same key points. So you want to, one other thing with the brand is that every single time the brand appears, there's many touch points that comes into contact with consumers, whether it's in a store, whether it's they're getting it as a free purchase, whether it's associated with a school, whether it's associated with a particular sports league. You want to make sure the way that it's being used is consistent across all the different types, places where it comes into contact with consumers. So the idea that a Coca-Cola product that you buy at McDonald's or Burger King is going to be the same Coca-Cola product that you buy in a grocery store or buy in a convenience store. This is once more being consistent, and we talked about this in terms of marketing products and particularly services. You have to basically get all of your employees to be customer centered, but also then to kind of eat, drink, and live the brand that you have. If you're in Atlanta, Georgia, everything is Coca-Cola. Because Coca-Cola is the brand, and if you go, they have Emory University, which was funded by a lot of Coca-Cola money. Emory University, basically you can't find Pepsi products anywhere on the campus, and that's kind of like the idea that this is the company town. This might be so much that you encourage, let's say, particularly with I think apparel and retail stores, you would want the people working for your company to be wearing your products. So if you're something like Old Navy or The Gap or other types of apparel stores, you might, in a sense, give away some of your product free to your employees so they can wear it, and that means that they're selling their product. I think one of the more effective of this is there's a restaurant near where I live, and they all wear T-shirts, and on the back of the T-shirts it says, we eat here too. And this kind of emphasizes the idea that this is good food, that we don't just work here, but we would also be customers if we weren't working. And you need to kind of be honest about the good and negative associations with the brand. British Petroleum is a good one. I mean, British Petroleum used to be a yellow BP on a green shield, and they've kind of moved toward kind of a green yellow sunburst, which I think is to suggest that it's more ecologically friendly. I don't think that's necessarily true, but the point is that British Petroleum, obviously, and I think most fossil fuel companies are trying to emphasize sustainability aspects and changing their colors to support that. So that's all for branding today. We're going to be moving on to the product life cycle in the next unit, but we'll be coming back to a lot of the topics today because brand and branding is not a is a wide topic and probably one of the most important in marketing. So that's all for now, and I'll see you next time.